Can you believe it? We're already at episode 146 of Becoming You Again, and I am your host, Karen Nelson. Welcome to Becoming You Again, the podcast to help you with your mental and emotional well-being during and after divorce. This is where you learn to overcome the grief and trauma of your divorce. We're going to do that by reconnecting with yourself, creating lasting emotional resilience, and living a truly independent life so that your life can be even better than when you were married. I'm your host, Karen Nelson. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm sure you're all very, very excited to hear part 2 of my conversation with Lauren Fair. If you remember, last week I had Lauren come on and she has been taking us through her 5 top tips on what every woman needs to know when hiring a divorce attorney. And so we are just going to jump right in to the continuation of our amazing conversation so that you can get the rest of Lauren's top tips and get out there and hire the best lawyer for you as you go through your divorce. When you go into this number 3, where we're kind of talking about the path that this lawyer is possibly going to take to get us to the end goal, is it really this idea, is there a specific question, or is it really just telling them your situation, telling them your goals and what you're hoping to get, and then just looking for specific clues in what they're telling you? Is that kind of the guidepost that we want to be using in this? Or is there something more specific of do we have to go to trial? Is that an approach that you like to take? Is that something that's very common for you? Is it more mediation based, or, is there something more that they can kind of dig to kind of guide in asking questions with this person who's in front of them?
Yeah, I think that there are different ways to approach it. I think one is sharing just, where you are, what brings you into the consult, and what your major, goals are for the process, right? Or concerns about what's going on that you would like to have addressed in the legal process. And just asking them in general, what would be your plan, for this based on what I shared with you? What would you recommend? And hearing, what the response is, right? And just sort of trying to assess, okay, does that make sense to me? Does that feel right to me? Is that sort of the approach that I want to take? Or is it sounding way too aggressive? Or is it sounding not aggressive enough, maybe?
Yeah.
Right. It's going to obviously differ depending on the situation, but you can even ask more specific questions if you want. Is this a case that you envision settling? What do you think the likelihood is of that? What do you think might be, in the way of that happening? Or is this something that, you think would do well in mediation? What percentage of your cases do you end up taking to trial? I mean, these are all just examples for, someone to choose, based on their situation, what's really, important for them to know. But here's the thing, Karen, is I think, someone could be listening to this and saying, well, I don't really know what I want, or I don't really know where I want to go. And this is the point to pause and consider working with a coach, because you really oftentimes don't know, because you're so wrapped up in whatever it is that's happening, that's bringing you into this situation to begin with, that it's really hard to see the future for things. And the future being a month from now, right? Or three years from now.
Yes.
And so this is a time where it can be really beneficial to have some support in determining, hey, what do I want the future to look like in various, aspects of what that entails, right? One could be what you want the co-parenting relationship to be like.
Yes.
What you would like in terms of, where you're going to be living, or what kind of time you're going to be spending with your children. And there's so many different aspects of what is my life going to look like at the end of this process, that there can be decisions made at the beginning that can affect whether you get there, right? In the end.
Right.
And so it's a really important step to stop and think about, what is the target that we're aiming for here? Because if we know where the target is, we have a much better chance of hitting it.
Yes. And we actually, okay, so I'm just going to direct everyone who's listening back to Lauren and my previous podcast episode, because we talk a lot about this idea of knowing the end goal, like having that target and really thinking about what it is that you want, so that so that you're not just like shooting at this, target that's like you have no aim. You don't even know where you're going or what you're asking for, what you're looking for, what you want. So I love directing everyone back to this idea of, whether it's with a coach or a confidant or someone that you feel comfortable with who understands this process of helping you think about these things and talk through them and work through them and make decisions for yourself about the direction that you want to go and what's going to be best for you. Because it's not the same across the board for everyone. What's important to me may not be important to you, Lauren, and what's important to that person over there may not be important to either one of us. And so it really is understanding for yourself, what do I want? Yes. And asking yourself those questions in all of these different areas. What do I want? What's the end goal?
Yes. Yes. And thinking about, what might jeopardize me getting that, and if you can have that valuable support of really thoughtfully going through and looking at, what is it that I want to end up with here? Then you can use that information to inform your decision around who might be the best attorney to help me get there.
I love that. Just bringing it back around. Like, this is what I want. And I've talked to these people and I feel like this is the person who can help me get as close to that goal as possible.
Yeah, because there are those different approaches, right? And so you've got to look at, based on where I want to go, what is the best way for me to get there? And sometimes that means choosing a different actual legal process that you utilize to get through it, right? Whether that's mediation, whether that's litigation, whether that's attorney to attorney negotiation, right? There's different ways of getting like from the beginning to an end of a divorce legal process. And those have different implications on the outcomes that you get, on the tenor of the relationship with your spouse for the future. If you've got kids, that's important. It does have an impact on your peace and your post-divorce life. And so these are just, different facets of this process that if you can really be mindful about, it just allows you to make a much more intentional decision and be able to plug in the right professionals that will help you get to that outcome. And so, one example of that might be, when it comes to hiring an attorney, is if you ultimately decide that you want to pursue a mediation process, and maybe you want to do that directly with your spouse and a mediator without attorneys present, maybe you still want legal advice, but you want it in the background for the time being while you try mediation. And there are attorneys that do that, who provide consulting services kind of in the background to help you while you're in mediation. But there are some attorneys that don't want to do that work. And so if you don't know, right, like that's the route that you ultimately will want to go, then you just don't know then what kind, are we using that as criteria or not for assessing, whether this is the right attorney for me? Like, do they even offer the service that I need?
Yeah. And I think this is just also going to be, saving, hopefully, possibly, money for you in the long run, because perhaps you hire this person who isn't going to go the mediation route. It's not really something that they do. You don't know that going into this relationship. And then you've put money down, you've put your retainer down on this person, and you're just continuing to funnel in money, and nothing seems to be going your way, and nothing seems to be going, how you thought it was going to. And then all of a sudden you're like, we've been at this for a year and a half, and I thought we were going to do mediation, and I can't get a hold of my lawyer, and nothing's really happened. And it can be a very costly and very frustrating situation. So I think taking these few steps and really thinking about things before you make that decision is just going to save you heartache and possibly money in the long run.
Yes. So the fourth area that we want to look at is just a deeper dive into location. So we talked before about we want to get somebody in the state.
Yes.
If you can get somebody who is very local to where you are, meaning the county that you're in, that's going to be important. And I just want to dive into a little bit more about why that's important. So it's for two major reasons. One is that family law attorneys bill hourly for their time. And if they're going to court on your case and they're 2 hours away from the courthouse that they need to get to, or maybe even more, like in California, you hire an attorney who is up in LA for a San Diego case.
Yeah.
That might be a 4-hour drive one way down here in traffic, right? And the attorneys charge for travel time most of the time. And so if they're traveling to and from court and it's taking them 4 hours each way, you've now added on 8 hours of billable time just for travel, right?
Yeah.
To what is already an expensive legal bill for their time at the hearing. So it's just something to consider. Now, post-pandemic, some places are much better with remote appearances, like virtual appearances now than they ever were before, but not always. It depends on your local court processes. It depends on sometimes the type of the hearing, whether the attorney thinks it's better that they be there in person or not. So it's just something to consider. If you're going to hire someone who is not local to your courthouse, like, do they charge for travel time? And how often do we think that's going to be happening? And use that data as a, data point among others for you to decide what kind of impact you want that to have,
Such
on
a
your
good
decision.
point. Like, I don't know that would have even occurred to me if I was out looking for an attorney, to help me in my divorce. Obviously, I would prefer someone who's closer, but like, I live a half an hour away from Salt Lake City, and Salt Lake City is a much bigger area than, the county that I live in. And so my brain might go, well, there's going to be more experienced lawyers in Salt Lake. Maybe I would just want to hire one from there to come up here to the court system. So that's a very good point, because I think that's, again, it might seem obvious to some people, but maybe not. Maybe it's not an obvious thing, and we just need to be aware that this is something that we should be thinking about, that we should consider in this decision-making process.
Yeah. And if you expect that your case is not going to end up in court, it might be less of a concern, right? Because if they're not traveling to court, then maybe that's not such a problem, right? So long as they're still in your state somewhere.
Yeah.
So I think it depends on your individual situation, but it's something to think about.
Absolutely.
Another one is on this point, the issue of knowing local court procedures. Because, for example, in California, San Diego has very specific kind of local rules and procedures that differ from, say, what happens in Santa Clara County, where I went to law school originally, right? Because I worked in family law up there too. And so I have that personal experience of just seeing the actual process is somewhat different up there than it is down here. And there are different local rules and different ways of doing things. And also there's just the knowledge that you get of how certain judges kind of demeanor is in the courtroom, kind of maybe where they fall in certain issues, that you get from active local practice, right? That if I go to some remote county in Northern California, right, like, I'm not going to have any of that local knowledge.
Yes.
And so I think sometimes that's not beneficial for clients, when that occurs, because they do kind of lack some of that local kind of expertise. So again, that's just something to consider, among other factors that you may be considering in making your selection. So the fifth and last area that we'll talk about today is just the cost of the attorneys.
Yeah.
Because there is not a set price, right? It's not a universal price for getting a divorce. And
unfortunately,
yeah,
as much as we all might
yeah,
hope that how amazing that might be.
right, right. And I mean, of course, everybody wants the best representation that they can have, right? But, do we need best of the best there, or do we need like really competent, really great, and also more of a mid-range price, as an example? And that's going to just be an individual decision based on your own budget, and that's something too that, in coaching, I think there's much more of an opportunity to examine is what really is my budget for this process?
Yes.
And what does that mean for the decisions I want to make around the process selection itself, around the attorney that I want to work with, et cetera? Because attorney's fees add up really quickly. Family law billing is just done hourly because you don't know at the beginning of a case what direction it's going to go, because it is a very active and ongoing dispute.
Yeah.
And so even, you can even have a situation where you go into a consultation under the impression that you have an agreement on everything because last night you sat at the dining table and you agreed on everything. And then tomorrow he says, he talked to an attorney, he's changed his mind. Right. So
yes. I've heard all this just as a coach. I'm sure you have too. Definitely have heard all of this.
Yeah. And so that's really why, most family law attorneys do not charge flat fees, for example, which is just like a fixed price for all of the services, because we just don't know what's going to happen, how much communication, one individual client needs, the counsel that's going to get involved on the other side and how they're going to impact the dynamic. And, so you've just got to sort of accept that most of the time you're not going to know at the beginning ultimately how many hours are going to be necessary in order to resolve your case, right? Unless you are in a situation, say, for example, where you're doing mediation at a flat fee or something, right?
Yes.
So, couple things to think about here are, what is the attorney's hourly rate? And, I would say in where I am right now, that's varying between probably on average 300 and 600 an hour. And that's going to vary.
So that's an important thing that you need to know going into this.
There's that piece. And then there's the retainer deposit, which is like the advance on those hourly fees that's paid in the beginning. And I find here it's really averaging between 5,000 and 10,000 right now. And I think sometimes people think they're just sort of focused on that initial retainer amount. Like, I just got to come up with that, right? And that is true in the beginning. You've got to come up with that to get the attorney on board. But that's just not the end in many cases of, what the charges are going to entail. And so I think one of the things that's useful at the beginning is to look at, okay, for this attorney, this is the retainer amount. Here's what the billable hour rate is. What does that translate into? Like, how many hours am I actually getting, right, of this attorney's time for that retainer?
And so, just so I'm clear, because I'm pretty sure that I understand what the retainer is, but it's like it's a set amount of like you said, between probably 5,000 and 10,000, just depending on where you're at. And so you would kind of divide that amount by whatever their billable hours are. And that gives you an idea of how many hours you've just paid for to start the divorce process with this person.
Yes.
And then anything that comes after that is at their billable hour rate after they've used up that initial retainer.
Yes. And different attorneys have different policies about what happens when the retainer is gone. They either will require that you replenish the retainer. So essentially you pay another retainer, right? That you keep your trust account funded with a retainer at all times. Or some of them are more flexible and allow you to, pay the bill when it comes. Some will allow payment plans, some won't. So those are some important things too to think about, and perhaps ask any questions around those issues that might be important for you to consider with your attorney. But Yes. I mean, you take that retainer amount, sort of divide it by the hourly rate. And you can bear in mind too that they do have staff oftentimes who bill at lower rates. So the paralegal may be doing some work on your case at a lower rate.
Okay.
And all of those rates should be in the fee agreement that you're reviewing and signing before you hire the attorney. But you got to just consider, how many hours do I think this is going to get me in terms of actual legal time, and understand that oftentimes it does go beyond the retainer. And so for my personal budget, what feels, like the best
Doable
fit for me,
yes,
in considering these other factors, beyond cost. But really, for most families, cost is a real concern in this process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And especially going into this process and thinking about like, okay, right now, my budget is this, but as I go through this divorce and things start to change, what's my budget going to look like then? And really educating yourself on financially what's doable, what you can make work for you. I think really just this whole conversation is very much about educating yourself on this potential person that you are going to be hiring, and really opening yourself up to asking a lot of questions, thinking about things and understanding things from a perspective of what feels best for me, what feels aligned with what it is that I want. And again, going back to this idea of you best. You might not feel like you best, but I promise you, the more you can tap into making decisions, the easier it is to understand what decisions are right for you and the directions are right for you. And you kind of tap into that alignment and that intuition of this is the right decision for me.
Yeah, definitely. And there are so many reasons that an attorney can be really useful to you in this process, just from managing expectations to protecting your interests and helping educate you on what the law is, right? So what's reasonable to settle for. But what we just want to make sure is that you're making the right decision about who that person, is going to be, and specifically how are they going to play a role, right, in your individual case. And you not, have somebody that you think you're going to go the distance with, and a month into it you realize you've either made a mistake or it's just outside your budget, and now you've got to start that process over again. That's just never what I want another woman to have to do. No. If it could be avoided.
Yeah, and what a frustrating thing to have to get into this process and realize, like, I hate to use the word mistake, because obviously you're going to be learning something from this. And so, but like, oh no, this wasn't possibly the right choice for me, because I wasn't allowing myself the opportunity to consider all of these things that have been laid out in front of me now. Hindsight can often offer us a lot of information, but if we can get that information up front and not need it in hindsight, like, what a benefit that is going to be for you going into your divorce and your future, what that future is going to look like for you.
Yeah, definitely. And, if you feel like maybe you made the wrong decision about who you hired, I think you just need to give yourself a lot of compassion, because you made the best decision that you could at the time with the information that you had available.
Yeah.
And if you're feeling like you want to change now, course in terms of maybe the way it's being handled or the person that's handling it, like maybe, now you have some additional experience and data that you can utilize to, make a decision that would be a better fit for you going forward.
Yeah, I love that. I love that advice of just really giving yourself grace and recognizing. I think it's true. I think we do, we only know what we know, right? And so the information that we have at hand is what is going to inform our decisions moving forward. And with this information that you have kind of laid out, these 5 steps of what you want to go into looking for a lawyer, that is just going to offer you some more pieces of information that will help you make a more informed decision for yourself.
I hope so, Karen. That's what I want for everybody.
I
love helping them make the right choice for them.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And I love that you, in the position that you're in as a family law attorney, as a divorce coach, mediator, as a life coach, you have so much knowledge and wisdom. And I love that you are just in the corner of helping, these women make the most informed, best decision for them in the best possible way. And the only way to do that is, what we've just said, is having as much information as possible at your fingertips.
Yeah. I mean, this process is hard enough as it is, right? Like this transition, all of the changes and everything, it's stressful enough. If we can avoid the wrong people on the team, one less stressor.
One less. I love it. It's so true. Well, Lauren, this has been incredible. I just love having you on the podcast. I can't wait to invite you back again. I hope that you'll say yes.
You're so sweet.
But can you please tell my audience where they can find you if they want more information about working with you?
Sure. Yeah. You can visit my website at laurenfaircoaching.com, and you can find me on Instagram at laurenfaircoaching.
I love it. Is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with today, of just a little nugget of advice that you want to leave them with today before we jump off?
I just want them to know that they can navigate this process confidently and sensibly. And any fears that they might be having around not knowing what the right next step is just totally normal, and something that they absolutely can work through if they want to. Because I just hear from so many women things like, oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know. I haven't done this before. I just don't really know. That's just so how we're conditioned, right? It's like, we have to apologize for not knowing all the things about something that we've never done before and really had no desire to do. Yeah. But we're doing it now because now, this is what we need to do in order to get where we want to be. And so, you're not supposed to know all the things. And just because you don't now doesn't mean that you can't, and that you really have more power to influence the trajectory of this process than you think you do.
I love that. That is incredible insight. I love that.
Thank you.
All right, Lauren, thank you so much for being here. And I can't wait until our next episode. You're amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hi, friend. I'm so glad you're here, and thanks for listening. I wanted to let you know that if you're wanting more, a way to make deeper, more lasting change, then working one-on-one with me as your coach may be exactly what you need. Together, we'll take everything you're learning in the podcast and implement it in your life with weekly coaching, real-life practice, and practical guidance. To learn more about how to work with me one-on-one, go to KarenNelsonCoaching.com. That's www.KarenNelsonCoaching.com. Thanks for listening. If this podcast agreed with you in any way, please take a minute to follow and give me a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And for more details about how I can help you live an even better life than when you were married, make sure and check out the full show notes by clicking the link in the description.